example, how bad are these drone and missile, how big of a toll is it really taking on the Russian?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that it's having an impact on the Russian economy. The Russian president acknowledges it, as much. Let's just be clear here. Let's put things in perspective for a second. Russia pounds the holy crap out of Ukraine on a weekly basis. When a Russian missile hits a Ukrainian target, it does so with thousands of pounds of TNT with precision strike ability. They're literally blanketing Ukraine, destroying everything of value. Ukraine still functions. All right. Ukraine's hitting Russia with mosquito bites. These little FP1 drones go in with minuscule little warheads. They set off fires that are rapidly put out. They do some damage. The damage is rapidly repaired. It causes a hiccup here, a hiccup there. Russia has a plan for all of this. You know, all these lines you're seeing, yeah, you can take a day where there was a hiccup and back in 3 days, the line's gone. Crimea, there's a little bit of a pain. When I was in Melitopol, gas stations didn't function because there's drones everywhere. But we say there's drones everywhere. Well, look, I just spent a month studying Russian drone warfare. The Russians are kicking the living crap out of the Ukrainians. Okay, you're just not getting that on Western media. The Ukrainians are out there. They'll have a brigade. The brigade will have a brigade UAV command post. Each battalion will have its own separate command post. The Russians are killing all of these command posts on a daily basis. They hunt them down through pattern of life reconnaissance, and then they pound the crap out of them with bombs and missiles. They're slaughtering these people. It takes 4 weeks minimum to train an adequate drone operator. It takes 6 months for this drone operator to be combat effective. And the Ukrainians are putting their combat effective drone operators there, and they're being killed by the thousands, and they can't be replaced. No one's talking about this. There are no functioning gas stations between the front line and Kharkov today. There are no functioning gas stations in Zaporozhye. Why? The Russians have destroyed them all. So let's just deal with the fact that it's Ukraine that's dying right now, not Russia. I was in Moscow the day it got hit with 500 drones. The people of Moscow didn't even blink. Didn't even blink. I was in St. Petersburg the day it got hit with 96 drones. They didn't even blink. They don't care. I mean, they do. It's a pain in the ass. But the idea that the Russians are running around scared to death here, there, oh my goodness, the Ukrainians are hitting us with drones. We don't know what to do. These are people that suffered 27 million dead in World War II, and they honor this every year. They have memorials. They know these are tough, resilient people. I was in Melitopol for several days. They don't have electricity. They don't have running water, and they're not giving up. They wake up every morning, roll up their sleeves, and get to work. Talk to the soldiers. It's a tough fight. They're winning. That's what people tend to forget here. The Russians are winning this thing across the board. What we're seeing right now is one of the largest propaganda exercises in the history of propaganda exercises. The Ukrainians are slipping some drones through. When you fire 590 drones and 8 get through, you call that a success? You call that a success? It's unsustainable. And then the Russians counter by blowing up the drone factories and the drone assembly points and the missile assembly points. And they're exhausting the Ukrainians. There's nothing left. And so what? Ukraine has this little gathering in Ankara, Turkey, where they suddenly are promised the sky. None of that's ever going to happen. There won't be a single Patriot missile ever assembled in Ukraine. It will never happen. We're talking about sending them PAC-3s right now. You honestly think that there are no more Patriot missiles in Ukraine right now. They're out. They got nothing. They got no air defense. So the Russians are hitting willy-nilly. There's nothing getting shot down right now. So what, the Ukrainians now are going to slip in a whole new air defense network under Russia's watchful eyes and establish it without the Russians hitting it? You think that's going to happen? You think the Ukrainians are going to build a 600,000 square meter factory to assemble Patriots and nothing's going to happen? It's over. It's a propaganda exercise. You have AI-driven bots, sitting there spouting crap about Russia this, Russia that. There is zero panic. There are some left-wing liberal. I had an interview with one, Ksenia Sobchak. I mean, she hates the Ukrainian war. She despises what Russia's doing, and she's open about it. She is the distinct minority. The people of Russia today are 100% behind their president. People keep talking about the September 20th election, and Putin better watch his back. What a frickin' joke. Putin's watching his back. Putin's leading the country to victory against the war that's not just defined by Ukraine, but the collective West. Germany, let me tell you why. I'm somebody. Look, I famously gave a speech in St. Petersburg. I said, "Shoot the dog," and I was talking about Europe. I said the solution is to shoot the rabid dog, and Europe is a rabid dog. Vladimir Putin came out the next day and gave a speech where he didn't even talk about the war. Why? Because he's not going to let this war define Russia. He has bigger things to worry about, like the future. $84 billion worth of investments signed at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Now, he gave, in the question and answer period, he came out and was, very precise about the orders he was giving his military. You're going to win this war. Robote and bratte. Work, brothers. I mean, that resonated. That one sentence there woke the entire Russian nation instantly because they realized their president is behind the soldiers, and the soldiers ate that up. But Germany, yes, Germany published a white paper that talks about the inevitability of conflict in 2029. The German army today is what, 148,000 strong? Pistorius is talking about building an army of a little less than 500,000. And yet he had to come out and admit, we can't recruit the people. Nobody wants to fight for Germany. Nobody wants to fight for Germany. 60% of the German military manpower of military aid said, even if we're invaded, we're not going to fight. Germany's not the same Germany of the past. You have a whole bunch of warmongers at the top talking big. There's nothing. Rheinmetall's signing contracts for missiles that will never get built because the economy is going to collapse. Every single German leader behind this buildup will be out of power in a year. The German government is collapsing. You think there's support for Merz? There's no support for Merz. And when AfD comes in and is part of a coalition, you think they're going to let this march to war? This is a self-cleansing problem. Emmanuel Macron. Le Pen just got cleared to enter the presidential race. Goodbye, Macron. You're finished. Keir Starmer. He's going to be replaced by who knows what, but whatever replaces him isn't going to last. There is no sustainability in Europe, politically, economically, at all. NATO is a defunct machine falling apart as we speak. For all the hot air about NATO and this, that, and the other thing, the United States is still talking about invading Greenland. How's that going to go over with the NATO membership? And gosh, the last time I saw, the United States said, we're not doing any business with Spain, a NATO member. Really? And the NATO membership is going to sit back and say, that's okay? The United States is now pulling out. NATO's got nothing. Europe's got nothing. There is nothing there. There is no threat from Europe whatsoever except this drone threat. And so the question is Vladimir Putin going to commit economic suicide by elevating the drone threat to more than the mosquito bite that it is? When you have an FP1 drone with 20 kilograms of high explosive go pop at an oil refinery and the fire's put out within a minute, is that worth changing the entire dynamic and algorithm of the winning combination? People tend to forget the Russians are winning on the battlefield. There's not a single place where the Ukrainians have turned the tables. They're dying in droves. They're being slaughtered as we speak. And I no longer say it's tragic because I was in the Donbass. I had Ukrainian drones built by Google and by and guided by Elon Musk attack me personally. All right? I'm tired of these people. And you know what? The Russians are tired of them too. The day of soft peddling, oh, we're brothers, we're cousins, that's not being heard anymore. What's being heard is it's time for victory. It's time to get this thing done. Vladimir Putin's heard that. He's given the instructions to the military. They're doing a good job. I was a big believer that Russia was going to strike out against Europe sometime this summer. Not anymore. Why? There's no reason to. Europe is a joke. Russia's winning. The West just refuses to acknowledge it. Gilbert Doctorow is out there spouting his bullshit, as he always does. But Gilbert, why don't you come with me to the Donbass? I'll introduce you to some real Russians. I'll show you what real Russians do when they fight. And I'll introduce you to the people in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Ekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, Volgograd, and the rest of Russia that are lining up, volunteering to go fight in this war. You blow up an oil refinery in Omsk, all you did is guarantee that you're going to get 15,000 citizens from Omsk signing up to go to the front lines to kill all the Ukrainian bastards that are causing this problem. There's no sympathy in Russia anymore, except for the likes of Ksenia Sobchak, and I call her Princess Onegin. I think Ray might even get what I'm talking about there. Pushkin's, Prince Onegin, the Russian who wasn't a good Russian. She's Princess Onegin. So are all the other liberals out there who pretend to love Russia, but are really doing nothing more than trying to undermine Russia. These people don't count. They're mielich. They're nothing. The real Russians are there. Putin's not worried. Nobody in Russia is worried worth their salt, and that's where I'll leave it.
So if I invite Gilbert Doctorow and he agrees to come on with you and debate you, will you do it?
Face to face. I want to look him in the eyes. I want to make sure he shits his pants because I'm not going to let him sit there and do long range sniping. If Gilbert wants an interview, let's do it face to face. So when I look him in the eyes and I can tell, look, I'm an old human intelligence guy. I did interrogations for a living. Yeah, I'll do it in a heartbeat. I'll do it long distance. I'll do it close distance. I'll do whatever he wants. But he won't do it. But I'll be more than happy to do it.
Well, I'm
Excuse
going to
my.
ask if Zoom is if you consider Zoom face to face, that's what I could
Well, we'll do it.
arrange.
Yeah, but I'd really like to smell him after we finish the debate.
Well, we'll have to move this to Brussels then, I think. So what you're saying, Scott, is that Putin doesn't need to change really much anything at all. Does it continue with the war as he's prosecuting it?
Well, they will change their targeting. I mean, look, and we saw that the Russian targeting again. Don't believe anything you hear in the West. The Russians have been very assiduous in their targeting to ensure that they only strike military-only facilities. They're very clear. All the damage that's being done to Ukrainian civilian targets are done either by Ukrainian air defense, and this is the primary goal. And this has always been the case. You go back to Israel in 1991. The majority of the buildings damaged during the Iraqi Scud attacks were damaged by Israeli Patriot missiles. That's just the way it is. Saudi Arabia, Patriot missiles. Here you have, Ukrainian Patriot missiles and other air defense missiles striking buildings and causing a lot of damage. Russia didn't do that. Or they shoot down a Giron drone and it crashes into a building. But Russia doesn't strike buildings with civilians in it. They just don't do that. But what you see Russia doing now is expand, because what the Ukrainians have done, and Trump actually admitted this. People didn't catch this, I don't think, when he said, the Ukrainians build a lot of drones, he said. They're building them in basements and they're building them in. Really, President Trump? They're building them in basements. Well, yes, we know this because we have Ukrainian housewives put social media postings saying, I have a side gig. I produce drones in my own home, drone parts. And then we take them to the basement, we assemble them, and then trucks come and pick them up, take them to a warehouse where they're distributed. So you've turned all of Ukraine into one giant military production facility, which is, again, a violation of the law of war. Russia's given them a pass until this last attack. Russia, for the first time, is starting to strike the dual-use civilian infrastructure that's known. For instance, furniture factory. Everybody, oh, it's a furniture factory. No, it was a drone factory. It's a furniture factory repurposed as a drone factory. They blew up a hotel. Why? Well, you got a bunch of NATO guys in there, so you don't get to sleep for free anymore, NATO. And I think you're going to see Russia expanding the target deck this way, with far more precision strike against a far greater range of targets. They're hitting the locomotives. I think Russia, you'll see, will start taking out additional infrastructure, the rail network, et cetera. They'll start taking that out. But the idea that Russia is going to strike Europe, unless something really stupid happens, I'll give you an example. Let's say FP5 strike the Kremlin. That's sort of a game changer, I would say. That's a big deal. But Russia has built concentric rings of air defense around the Kremlin, around Moscow. You see things get through on the periphery, but you don't see things actually penetrate into the center of Moscow because they've got that place pretty well sealed off. But unless something like that happens, a direct targeting of the president or some sort of target of strategic infrastructure that actually creates an existential problem for Russia, I don't see Russia striking Europe at all. I just see them expanding the deck, and I don't see Putin changing much of anything. The economy is actually quite healthy. The economy is quite healthy. It could be healthier. It would help if there weren't sanctions. But the idea that the Russian economy is collapsing is absurd. Compare the Russian economic numbers with any nation in Europe. Talk about inflation and all this kind of stuff. The Russian economy is doing okay.
So, Ray, what do you think Putin's options are? Do you agree with Scott that he's going to pretty much continue the war as is?
Yeah, I pretty much do agree with Scott, which was not the case 4 or 5 weeks ago. Um, what changed your mind, Scott? Why do you no longer think that Latvia, for example, might be hit? Uh, is it your experience there with the confidence you've encountered, and what changed your perspective, as you acknowledged, in the last 6 weeks or so?
Well, the big thing was I was invited to St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. I participated in what I consider to be one of the one of the better panels, the one on international diplomacy. I had a deputy foreign minister there, the head of INGIMO, the Diplomatic Training Institute. I had several professors from there, and I listened to them talk about diplomacy, and I gave one of my famous Scott Ritter overreactions, and I said, Europe is a rabid dog. You should shoot the dog. It got a standing ovation from the crowd, and all the Russian diplomats were aghast because, my God. But then they loved it. And then the next day, I got invited to sit in the second row at the plenary session, literally paper airplane throw away from the president himself, and listen to him speak. And just and Ray, you know this because you're an experienced hand at this stuff. There's one thing to read the word, read the written word. It's another thing to watch a person deliver the presentation. And I watched President Putin deliver his presentation, and then I watched his body language, and I saw one of the most confident, comfortable men I've ever seen in a situation like this. This is a man who said he's not going to let this war define Russia's future. That Russia's future will be defined by economic stability. He's trying to create a stable, effective environment for investment. He got $84 billion worth of investment signed during the couple of days at SPIEF. And then I started talking to Russians after, because believe it or not, my little presentation created some waves, and there was feedback. And then I went to the Donbass, and I don't know what I expected to see in the Donbass and Zaporozhye. I was supposed to go to Kherson, but it was just too dangerous. We got chased out of Melitopol because of the drones, not because the people who live there are scared. They just didn't want me to get killed, because it's dangerous. So thank you for those people who cared about me. But the point is that what I saw there, in the worst situations, I'm talking about places where there's no gas, there's no electricity. I didn't see a defeated people. I saw the exact opposite. And what I saw throughout Russia was just people who were like, hey, if Ukraine wants a fight, okay, I mean, let's do this. But the only people screaming about striking Europe are the people, and I don't mean to insult anybody, and I'm not, to Simeon and Solovey also have a business, and their business is to generate viewership, is to generate controversy. And so they make these statements, but they are very removed from reality, because the reality of the Russian government, I don't see any panic in the Russian government. None. I just don't see the panic. And it's not because they're ignorant. They know Vladimir Putin knows exactly what's going on with the energy. I've talked to the energy people. They're acknowledging there's some pain. There's some pain. It's not fatal. It's like getting stung by a hornet. That hurt. But now am I going to amputate my arm because a hornet stung me? No. Kill the hornet. Is there a hornet nest? Burn the nest down and keep on moving. And that's where the Russians are right now. The Ukrainians need to understand, and Europe needs to understand this. Russia has brought just a fraction of its military capacity to bear on Ukraine. There is so much more, and I'm not talking about nuclear. There's so much more that Russia can do that Russia's not doing. And what Ukraine is doing by going down this path is guaranteeing that Russia's going to do more. And this is why Vladimir Putin has made some amazing statements. I mean, if you're in a panic, why do you just basically say Sumy is a Russian city? Do you understand what that means? It means Sumy is a Russian city. It's not a security buffer zone. Sumy is a Russian city. It's going to belong to Russia. Kharkov is a Russian city. Odessa is a Russian city. Vladimir Putin said this for the first time. And people don't understand.
Yeah, that's the buffer. That's the buffer zone that I referred to before.
Oh, no, it's Russia, baby. It's Russia. This is over.
Right now. Yeah. Okay.
Ukraine doesn't understand what's about to happen to it. It's going to cease to exist. That's what's going to happen to Ukraine.
Do you think Putin wants that all of Ukraine would?
Ukraine, as it currently configured, will cease to exist.
Yeah.
Denazification is going to be one of those brutally efficient purges of person. I've spoken to too many Russians about this who are involved peripherally, at least, in the planning for post-conflict Ukraine. The concept that a Zelensky government and anybody affiliated with Zelensky is going to be in a position of power when this war is done is a concept that's not considered in Russia.
Mhm.
Russia's actively preparing for post-conflict governance and will be done by the people picked by Russia. And if you are somebody that people need to understand, in talking to people about Starbelsk, of course, the teachers' college that was hit, 21 students murdered in their sleep by Ukrainian drones who were guided to their targets by Elon Musk's Starlink. Um, the notion that this war ends and the people who launched that strike get to live, that's not a reality. And this is the reality for everybody involved in all of the decision making being done in Ukraine today. Budanov, dead man walking. Zelensky, forget Syrskyi, до свидания. So yeah, I think that what we call Ukraine today is not going to be how you.
Yeah, this, Scott and Joe, this is the kind of exchange that would ordinarily occur in a healthy intelligence community where various aspects would be discussed in a very frank. Now, I find myself playing the devil's advocate from where I was 5 or 6 weeks ago. But let me just say this. I too am impressed by Putin every time he speaks, every time he's supremely confident. And for those who say, well, it might be a palace coup, well, we'd be the least, we would not be the first to. We'd seen when Gorbachev had that coup against them. I know I was surprised. Of course, by definition, a coup surprises everybody. Now, let me just point out why I think that it's a little different than I thought before, and why my then. Here's Putin talking, and he seems to be under some duress. He's talking about, look, we need this buffer zone, and we should be we shouldn't be surprised by terrorist attacks small scale as the AFU continues to do this. And then he says, analysis should be combat. We need this analysis for possible responsible decision making. In any case, we may need this, okay? So it seems to me is look, on the high alert here for intelligent indications that these Europeans are going berserk and exceeding what they're doing already. And then, of course, Simonian, she's very, very close. And maybe it was just drama, but the Weltwoche, the Swiss interview. But at one point, the Weltwoche guy, he does his best. He says, that bad. He says, no, Miss, what do you think? I mean, you say there's a lot of pressure that to do more, to maybe hit out at Europe. What do you think your commander-in-chief should do? And she says, well, I'm not in the policy-making circles, but I think he should move much more rapidly and much more aggressively. And the interviewer says, but when? And she says, shit, I work for yesterday, all right? So, yeah, this may be just a kind of a public display to say, look, Putin's under a lot of pressure and he could do this. But I agree with you, your bottom line, saying he's very confident. I think he's got a way to counter the Starlink. I think the Russians now have their, and you would know more than I about this, their own kind of Starlink fledgling program. And you do see Putin just, so again, I'm where you are now. It's just that there does seem to be some resistance. And if I were Bela Usov, let's say I was the defense minister, okay, and I see all these deals coming out of NATO, and I say to myself, well, okay, Ukraine's not going to build patriots, for God's sake. We can't, U.S. can't build patriots without 40 states being involved, Okay, so that's not a worry. But all this other stuff, my God. So are we going to wait another year or another 2 years? This is the time. I mean, what we do is before the what do they call it, in September, we got 2 months plus, okay? Let's just finish the job so then we can tell the Europeans, look, this is over. Don't forget, don't even think of it. And US, thanks very much, but we're not gonna welcome Mutt and Jeff. I mean, of course, the son of if they come here again, forget about it. Putin's not going to stay up till 3 in the morning listening to what they have to say. That's over. So there is the harder line by Lavrov. Let me just say a word more about Lavrov because I think this was really very telling. This business about, well, we're not going to listen to you anymore because we don't trust you. Here it is. I'll just read it again. We no longer believe that the West, when it claims to want a negotiated solution, this is good. This is big. Our reserve of goodwill and hope has been that is the spirit of anchorage. Now, as I said before, Ryabkov, his deputy, got in trouble 4 months ago for saying that. Now that needs to be said, and they're tired of Trump because they can't depend on what he says, and they're not going to listen to Mutt and Jeff anymore. So I guess we come out on the same plane this time around, Scott. And thanks for sharing all your experiences there in Russia.
Not, on diplomacy. Yeah, I've come up with a new term. So there was an article in Foreign Policy magazine a couple year 2022 post-COVID that talked about hybrid diplomacy, but they were using it in the terms of virtual diplomacy, meaning that diplomacy is a face-to-face business and diplomats meet. But because of COVID, we couldn't meet face-to-face anymore, so we had hybrid diplomacy, Zoom diplomacy. Now, let's just call it virtual diplomacy. The term hybrid diplomacy I'm using is similar to hybrid warfare. We have a situation today where diplomacy is no longer what it was. I mean, because what Lavrov said is true, but Mutt and Jeff will be received by the Kremlin. All right, so why? Because hybrid diplomacy means that everybody knows that everybody's lying, that nobody's negotiating in good faith, and that you're just going through the motions to get temporary moments of advantage. And look, we see this right now with Iran and in the United States. The MOU was hybrid diplomacy. Neither side expected this to last. The Iranians knew the United States was going to lie from the start. And of course, the United States are looking for any excuse to, blame the Iranians. And yet what they both did is, Iran sold 60 million barrels of oil and the United States got its oil back up. And now they're back in exchanging blows, hybrid diplomacy. Russia and the United States. Russia knows the United States is lying. The United States has no intention of living up to it, but Russia's going to receive the American diplomats because they get temporary, advantage out of certain things happening. It's hybrid diplomacy. It's all bullshit. And that's what's happening right now. There is no real diplomacy anymore. It's just a straight up, and that's what we're talking about here. This is literally general warfare. On Margarita Simeone, again, I don't know her like you do. I think I met her one time at a television. She was on a panel of people asking me and some other people questions. And then we had a brief conversation, as I walked off the stage. I respect her, but she's very close to President Putin. And she's also has her finger on the pulse of, and right now I think that she and Solovyov have a job to do, and that's to make sure that the Europeans change their underwear every night out of fear that Russia may do something. But I don't think Russia's going to do anything. I don't, because what does Russia gain from it? The one thing that came out of this Russian trip was the question, okay, so Putin bombs Dusseldorf. What next? What next? And if the answer to that question isn't that Russia advances its strategic position, that Russia improves its, and so by striking Europe, all you do is create the opportunity. For instance, everything Germany's doing right now is going to collapse in the next year and a half. None of these factories are going to be built. All of these investments are going away. If AfD becomes part of a governing coalition, there will be no ATACMS production in Germany. There will be no Patriot production in Germany because Germany can't afford to do it. And it's bad policy for Germany. So from the Russian perspective, why would you do something that suddenly causes the Germans to potentially rally around a government that's going away? And all you would do.
No, I'm sorry. No, or even worse, raise the Article 5 provision of the NATO treaty.
Yeah, the problem with Article 5 is the reality is there is no Article 5. First of all, every NATO member now coming out and saying, it doesn't mean we have to automatically respond. Have you guys read the fine print? I mean, when you got NATO members saying that, you realize they ain't going to be lining up. Two, okay, let's say they all said automatic, we're in. With what? I still want, with what? What are you going to come in? Germany, what do you got? And the answer is nothing. They just had a former German Minister of Defense come out and say, we got nothing. There's literally nothing. We've got nothing. The French, they literally have nothing. The Italians, nothing. The British, I mean, not only nothing, they have a black hole that's just sucking their military into it. They get smaller and smaller every year. There is no Article 5 capacity in Europe because they've got nothing to respond. Even the United States has nothing. So,
Whoa. Okay, that's where we differ, In other words, I think you have to look at Trump the way the Russians do, as incredibly unpredictable, mercurial, impossible to figure out what he's going to do. And give it, right? And he says, okay, now you say that the Latvians just fired some drones at us, Ukrainian drones from Latvian soil, and we warned them about that. Okay, now you say we should hit Riga, right? Yeah, we should hit Riga, the capital of Latvia. That's a decision-making place. We'll hit it. Okay, what do y'all think? Well, now you over there, you told me just last week that the psychological profile that you cannot predict within any confidence what he'll do. Okay, so what do you think the chances are that Article 5 would be invoked by Latvia, and that Trump would say, "I'm in there"? What do you think? 5%, 10%, 5%. Too high, for God's sake. We're winning the damn war. Why would I want to do 5% or 10%? Okay. So what I'm saying here is that there is this attitude that in my view, Putin has deliberately and consistently rejected, that we should take risks that we now against that.
I'm on your side.
Yeah, well, I know no, and thank you. But the other part is, here's Peskov. Now he is very close to, I mean, what he says is what Putin's, and he's talking to the same Weltwoche journalist, and he permits himself to say, "Oh, you're not going to do that." Okay. Well, Peskov doesn't say things that matter that much off the hand. So, again, I mean, I see more signs now that Putin might be under some more pressure than I thought 2 months ago. And it's good that I hear you say he's holding fast. I think so too, but I am worried about Lavrov saying, "Look, you got taken in again," in effect, to Putin. You got taken in again, okay? There is no agreement. And Putin, 3 days later, says, "Oh, yes, there is. There's an agreement. But we had an understanding." And Putin's, there are mixed voices here. And Alaska meant something to Putin, at least. And now it's lumped in with a deception operation by Lavrov. The Istanbul Accords in April of 2022. In other words, hey, Mr. Putin, not going to take it anymore. We have given up. We have run out of patience with the U.S. That matters, but I don't think it really
right, but there was there's fine print to that too. I think a statement came out either from the president or from Ushakov or somebody. We have no faith in the Americans anymore, but with Trump, we keep the door open.
Yeah, and now even that is so.
This is what I call, again, hybrid diplomacy. Okay, that's what's being done here. This is just, you're not shutting any doors. You understand that the Americans are lying. There's no faith about Anchorage anymore, nowhere. But they're not going to shut the door because there is momentary advantage that can be played. Because first of all, their assessment of Putin or of Trump is that he's stable. They didn't say he's insane. He's emotionally unstable, therefore volatile and unpredictable. But that means that he can go any way on any given day. So what hybrid diplomacy does is it leaves the door open for that day when he suddenly goes, oh, because trust me on this one. Look what's happening with the Patriot missiles. they're already backing off. Now it's no longer we're going to build a factory inside Ukraine. It's we might ship some. Germany might build the missiles and then ship them in. But and so it's already backing away. And when he comes in Congress, see, Trump spoke without doing any due diligence. So he comes back to Congress. How are you going to handle a lot of this technology transfer issues? You know, he doesn't have the answer to that, and he's going to run it, and he's going to get frustrated. And then what he's going to realize is Zelensky lied to him the whole time, and then he's going to get the real briefing from somebody. He's going to get pissed off, and he's going to go over here, and all the Russians are doing through hybrid diplomacy is making sure that the door's open when Trump changes his mind about Zelensky, so they can sit there and give Trump a chance to vent, and they'll take advantage of that. Meanwhile, nothing changes. Russia keeps doing what they do.
Yeah, no, I think you portray the situation correctly. A small point, Mutt and Jeff, Kush.
Beavis and Butthead.
The last I, that's better. The last I heard was when Ushakov did the readout of Trump's call to Putin about a week ago. And what was said there, if I recall correctly, was, Kushner or the two. Now, do you think they're going to be allowed in the Kremlin again?
What I think is this. This is my take on hybrid diplomacy. I'm trying to develop it into a paper, but I think this by that statement. And so Trump is going to have a hissy fit in the near future. First of all, look what he just did. He's canceling all the Iranian contract, and he's re-sanctioning Russian oil. At the same time, the Strait of Hormuz is just closed again. As we speak, the Iranians are sowing mines through the Omani corridor. It's done. And the Yemeni, the people aren't paying attention to what's happening in Yemen right now with the Houthi in Saudi Arabia. And the Houthi are getting ready to shut down the Bab el-Mandeb. Dmitry Medvedev accurately said that is the thermonuclear bomb. The Strait of Hormuz is the nuclear bomb. When they do that, 70% of Saudi oil that's been redirected to Yanbu and through Bab no longer gets to market, and we'll have a sudden energy deficit again. And Donald Trump's going to freak out, and then he's going to say, "Well, let the Russians sell all the oil they want, and let the Iranians sell oil too, because we have no choice." They'll go. He'll flip right back to where he was. It's inevitable. It's 100% guaranteed that Donald Trump is going to run out of Tomahawk missiles, run out of ATACMS, run out of HIMARS, and the world's going to run out of oil, and he's going to have to come back and re-embrace the MOU and re-embrace Russia. And when he does that, the Russians will say, "Hey, Mutt and Jeff can come and talk to us now. We got something to talk about." And they'll bring him in, and they'll say, "Sit down and let's talk." And they know it's a game. They know that this is purely positional warfare, taking advantage of something, because they know in a month's time, Zelensky is going to come crying to Senator Graham. He's going to go crying to Marco Rubio. He's going to go crying to J.D. Vance. He's going to go crying to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's going to change his mind again. And the emotional instability will go back this way, and then it will no longer be convenient. But the Russians are going to play. It's just all a situational awareness game. This is what hybrid diplomacy is. There is no consistency because you're dealing with a fundamentally insane individual, or as the Russians say diplomatically, emotionally unstable. How do you deal with an emotion? It's what I talked about this in the past. And I said this to the Russians. I said, because they're like, how can we deal with Trump? I said, I don't know. How do you deal with bad weather? How do you deal with the weather? You wake up in the morning, you look at the sky, and you decide what you're going to wear. If it's going to rain, you have a raincoat, you have an umbrella. If it's sunny, you layer down. How do you deal with Donald Trump? Wake up in the morning and see what's going on and dress accordingly. And this is hybrid diplomacy. Every day is a new day. You just adjust to the stupidity of the moment from the United States. This is the antithesis of what the Russians want. Anatoly Antonov, I had a really cool discussion with him about, who do you want to see win the election? You want to see Trump replace Biden? And he said, we don't care. I said, really? You don't care? He said, no. What we want, the thing we love more than anything else, is predictability. Right. You tell me what's going to happen, I can build a policy to deal with that. And then we can implement the policy. What we don't like is unpredictable. I said, well, Trump is talking about he's your friend there. He's saying, yeah, but is he? Is it predictable? Okay, so he comes in. We saw from last time, he promised this, but then he did this. And it's impossible to build consistent policy when it's doing this. So the idea that the Russians wanted Donald Trump to win is absurd in the extreme. They were like, we'll take advantage of his proclivity to claim he wants to be, but we know he won't be our friend because we know past patterns repeat themselves. And this was the birth of hybrid diplomacy, where the Russians and this is what I had to figure this out because I was as frustrated as you are, Ray. I mean, because I'm looking for consistency in the Russians. I always look for consistency in the Russians. And suddenly with the Russians, I'm seeing inconsistent statements. And I'm like, what the hell? Why? Why are you letting Kirill Dmitriev go off and do tunnel diplomacy? Why?
Right.
Well, because you're playing hybrid diplomacy. You're simply dealing with an emotionally unstable, insane narcissist. And every day you have to wake up, look at the weather, and decide what's my diplomatic clothing for the moment. That's hybrid diplomacy. The Russians, I think, are mastering the art, just like the Iranians have. The Iranians have learned to deal with the United States by understanding that nothing we say is true. We are agreement incapable. But that doesn't mean that you all the diplomatic doors. It means that every day you keep the door open, and when the chance comes, you jump on it. You get temporary advantage, temporary, this, and then you understand you're going back to what is in effect a permanent state of warfare. Russia understands right now, and you see this with Lavrov State, they're in a permanent state of hybrid warfare with Europe and the United States. This is the reality, and this state will remain until the causal factor is dealt with, and that's Ukraine. This is why the Ukrainian problem will not end in a negotiated settlement, because the Russians know that if they allow the cancer to remain, that the cancer will spread to Russia. They must excise the cancer. They must terminate the cancer, and the cancer is Ukraine. And if you do that, Europe collapses instantly. The only thing that holds Europe together, think about it. What's the one policy thing that glues Europe together? Ukraine. That's it. You eliminate Ukraine, there's nothing that holds this artificial entity called Europe together. In the United States, the only thing that keeps us going back to Europe is Ukraine. Eliminate Ukraine, and we're out of there. So I think the Russians right now are playing this hybrid diplomacy in understanding, though, that this is all about Ukraine and this is about terminating Ukraine. But in the meantime, take advantage of the fact that you have this extremely unstable narcissist who's bouncing back and forth. And when the opportunity is available, jump on it. Invite Beavis and Butthead in, stroke their little heads, feed them some borscht and some caviar, and send them on the way.
No, there's a lot to hybrid diplomacy. I'll make a bet with you, Scott. Mutt and Jeff. I'll be surprised if Mutt and Jeff are partly because Lavrov is feeling really ashamed. He and all his people have been kept out of these negotiations, even Kirill. So I'll bet you 25 cents next time we talk, whether Mutt and Jeff have gotten into the Kremlin or not. They're certainly not going to get back into Islamabad or Geneva or any other place where they're showing what kind of shysters, I mean, my God, shysters, swindlers, so the ones that sold the king the magic suit of clothes, all right? So that's a small point, but Joe, we haven't let you jump in at all. This is
okay.
your
I'm just enjoying the show. Go on, carry on, please.
Well, I don't know.
Well, let me say this.
Yeah.
Peskov, Putin's spokesman, said apparently this week that it's no longer a special military operation, it's a war. Is there any significance in that statement, Scott?
Well, if it was said by Putin, in order for it to be a war, there has to be a declaration of war. I mean, there's legal things that have to happen for it to become a war. It's not war isn't declared because the president's spokesman says there's a war. The president would actually have to make a presentation to the Federal Assembly, and there would, but what he's saying is pretty much that what's happening today is not what happened in February of 2022. We've seen a gradual conflict. Because we knew, hell, we had this conversation in May. Remember when I got in trouble for calling the $48 billion infusion of money a game changer? And I was accused of flip-flopping and being the world's worst analyst. Well, it was a game changer. You inject $48 billion into a war, rebuilding an army that would have been destroyed. It elongates this conflict. But you saw the West always sort of self-regulate. You remember the whole red line debate? We can't send Abrams tanks because that's a red line, could lead to World War III. We can't send F-16s, we can't send attack. Well, there are no more can'ts anymore. They're just doing. And I think this is what Peskov was saying, is that we're past the concept of a contained conflict. We are at the point where there can no longer be a doubt that this is a full-scale proxy war where Ukraine is providing the raw meat for a NATO-driven, and it's a war of existential proportions. You parse out the statements made in Europe, and you have to understand that the goal and objective here is not just the economic collapse of Russia, not just the military exhaustion of Russia, but the system. They want a Moscow Maidan. This is the message that's being sent out over and over again by these AI-generated bots that are dominating social media. Have you noticed what's been going on in Twitter? The flood of these new pro-Ukrainian bots that Elon Musk has elevated free of charge to dominate everybody's feed. They're all saying the same thing. It's all garbage, but they're all saying the same thing, and they're trying to create the impression that Russia's collapsing from within. And Gilbert Doctorow, of course, is trying to sustain this with his ludicrous assertions. Russia, there's literally zero. This is not, August 1991 or 90. Was it 91? Was that it? 91, right? Yeah, 91. This isn't August 91. This isn't August 17th, 91. There's not a Banya session right now where the head of the FSB and the head of the SVR and the head of the are sitting there getting drunk in the Banya saying, "We've had enough, and we're gonna go out into Turkey right now, and Putin is gonna, Putin guy." That's just not happening right now. Putin's in full control. There's consistency of argument. The look, it's still a special military operation, but now the scope and scale is expanding. The targeting is starting to take into account this is something that should have happened a while ago. Here I agree with Margarita Simeon. When, but things happen. Things happen when they're. The one thing that Vladimir Putin and the Russian Ministry of Defense have been very good at, you can't allow, you can't let the pot boil over. You've got to be able to manage the temperature, and that means when you add the different, components. There's a time and place when things are possible, and what you have to do is let the other side set a precedent and then react. Now, normally this is a bad thing. Ray, you're familiar with the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. And traditionally, we like to say that if you're inside the enemy's OODA loop, you're losing because, they're losing because you're the one driving the boat and they're reacting to you. And so one would say on the surface that allowing Europe and NATO to act and then you react is you're on the wrong end of the OODA loop perspective, except it's the Europeans. I'm becoming more and more convinced that what the Russians are doing is creating the opportunity for Europe to, again, everybody's focused on the rhetoric coming out of Great Britain. 2030, war with Russia. Okay, but what about the other rhetoric? We can't buy any new equipment until 2030. How can you have a war with Russia in 2030 if you can't buy any new equipment? We don't want to talk about that. Oh, that's right, because it's just bullshit what you're saying. And this is the whole Russia point. They know that Europe is literally sucking itself into a vortex of self-destruction. But what you have to do, see, if the Russians reacted first, if the Russians led off and said, I'm taking the initiative, getting the European reaction, that as the Europeans get sucked into the vortex of self-destruction, they may actually prepare for this. They may actually say, we have to be serious about this. Right now, you have a bunch of politicians who go to Ankara and say things and understand that everything they said, there's nothing to back it up, nothing of substance. You talk about Article 5. How can Trump, in his best day, implement Article 5 with what? Other than nuclear weapons. And he's not going to do that. The 5,000 troops gives you nothing on the modern battlefield. The Russians have 700 and, almost between 700 and 800,000 troops. right now. 5,000 American troops is not going to change. First of all, they're not going to get to the front line because as they move from the Polish frontier to to close with the Russians, they'll be destroyed by drone warfare that we're not even ready. Ray, I'm here to tell you, I saw it firsthand what the Russians are doing with drone warfare. I sat down with the units. I sat down with the research centers. I held the drones in my hands. I talked to them about the technology. Starlink is history. I think Joe made an allusion to that. The Russians have three different approaches to resolving the Starlink issue that I'm aware of personally. They're weighing decisions because there's heavy consequences, for instance, for shredding Starlink. That's one of their options. It can happen today. They can shred Starlink. It'll disappear. But that means there's a whole bunch of debris in space and the Russians can't get their own Starlink up. It's a problem. There's something interesting happening right now. Starlink sectors are shutting down on the battlefield. The Ukrainians, where they once thought, say everybody's talking about, oh, well, the Hornet. I interviewed Rogozin. You know who Dmitry Rogozin is, the former Roscosmos. He now runs something called BARS Sarmat. BARS, BARS, is a Russian abbreviation for a reserve system of veterans who come in like active reserve in the American military, and they form a military unit under the Ministry of Defense. Sarmat is the name he brought in because apparently, I didn't know this, Rogozin was involved in the Sarmat Development Committee, Technology Development Committee. So he helped create the Sarmat missile. But so BARS Sarmat is basically a brigade-sized element in the Russian Ministry of Defense, operates outside of Zaporozhye. They have their own research center, and they have combat units on the front lines. And I interviewed Rogozin, and we had a very interesting conversation. And at that time, the Ukrainians were and they still are. They have this drone called the Hornet. The Hornet is built by a company funded by Eric Schmidt, the head of Google. Eric, when I meet you, you're going to pay a price because I had a Hornet drone attack the convoy that I was in. Now the Russians shot it down, but I take this personally to have an American-made drone come after. It's criminal because they were attacking civilians and all this. But I talked to Rogozin about the Hornet, and I talked to Rogozin about the Starlink, and basically he said, things look bad now because the Ukrainians. He said, but we're evaluating this. We're very patient. My center has taken the drones apart. We've evaluated everything. And he said, you'll see very soon. Well, you're seeing right now, sector by sector on the front line, Starlink shutting down. Where the Ukrainians were able to operate drones freely, they can't. They're shutting, and the Russians that are pushing it, the Russians are using a technology. You talked about a Starlink analog. Well, that's not yes, the Russians, but for the Russians to build a Starlink analog, they would have to launch a lot more satellites. They're
Right.
working that direction, but they're not ready. They don't have the launch capacity. They don't have they don't have the ability to surge. I mean, Elon Musk can surge more Starlink satellites than Russia can at the moment, but they don't need to because they have, in addition to shutting it down sector by sector, there's another technology that I was shown that could just shut off the whole Starlink constellation, meaning it's gone. It doesn't shred it, it just ceases to function. But the Russians are responding with their own analog. They are using, and again, I'm not a technologist, so I'm still trying to work this thing out. I got an idea how it works, but they call it mesh. It's like a mesh internet capability, but basically the Russians are able to send into Ukrainian territory that communicate using internet. It can't be jammed, and they're just dominating. So all this stuff you're reading right now about what the Ukrainians are doing, understand that it's going to stop happening in totality pretty soon because the Russians are going to shut it down. The Ukrainians have their own mesh technology, and they are able to run some interesting drone strike, but the Russians are aware of this. Nothing's happening. I've never seen people so unpanicked in my life. I mean, I'm sitting there in Melitopol pooping my pants because the Russians I'm hanging out with, they're like, don't worry about it. Smell it. We got this. Let me
Well,
explain.
this was something that Putin himself, military officers there on Russia Day, they were complaining about Starlink and how they were unable to cope with it. And they suggest, we're working on it. Belousov, you got this under control? Yeah, we got it under control. So now let me ask you just a couple of specific questions. Tomahawks, are they going into Germany?
Well, the
That was
Germans,
one of the deals mentioned, I think.
yeah, the NATO summit, what they're talking about is the 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 Germans right now have a they're producing getting ready to bring in to production the it
Any
can't
any
it,
aircraft?
it can shoot anti-aircraft, and it can shoot down like the Caliber cruise missile, things like
Hmm.
that. Can't touch the Iskander M. It can't touch hypersonics. Only the PAC-3 has the potential to do that, and even that can't do it. But the motor production facility that they built for that, and they're getting ready to, they're talking about building for ATACMS, has the potential of expanding into a Tomahawk motor production facility.
Okay. All
That's
right.
that's what they're talking about. And the Germans are saying we want to be able to receive the but again, there's a whole bunch of questions about the license.
Right.
A lot of talk, but even if they did it, uh, the first of all, the Tomahawk is not.
Mhm.
I'll just say that right now. They've they know
It
how to
can't
shoot.
carry it can't carry nukes.
Even if it carries a nuke, then the Russians aren't worried about that
Okay.
because the Russians have made it clear that if you use a nuclear weapon against us, everybody dies. We don't,
Hmm.
it's there's no debating this point. So hopefully everybody gets that point that if you use a nuke against Russia, everybody dies.
Yeah,
Everybody.
Scott, a related question just to get my mind straight. Uh, the NATO summit in Washington, I think 2.5 years ago or so, there was a side deal between Scholz, the chancellor then, and Biden. We're going to put the kind of middle range ballistic missiles in Germany by mutual agreement, just the two of them, the same kind that were NF treaty. What became of that?
Trump killed it. The Dark Eagle was
Mhm.
supposed to be deployed to Germany this summer, and it's over. There will be no Dark Eagle deployment to Germany. Well, there's a couple reasons. One, the technology doesn't work. Um,
Okay.
and two,
Picky,
uh,
picky, 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 picky. I'm sorry.
two, I think that the United States is not happy with Germany right now. And this is why I think it's pie in the sky to think the United States is suddenly going to give Germany licensing rights to the Tomahawk. Um, and again, I'm curious about what's going to happen with ATACMS going forward. Um, the other thing people need to understand is the United States is as politically unstable as Europe is right now. We got midterm elections coming up where Trump could lose the House. And if anybody thinks that Trump is going to get the rubber stamp out of a, you know, um, Johnson run houses, I think you're wrong. I think that a Democrat controlled House is going to be about impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. Um, and so I just think that again, you know, I look at all the attention being given to Ankara right now, and I'm just like, none of this is all the political leadership in there, with the exception of maybe Erdogan, who's going to last? I mean, Trump 2028, no matter what, he's gone. Um, Mertz gone. Macron, Starmer already gone. Just hasn't been replaced yet. The point is, I mean, even Meloni, I mean, she has to be careful. She has to be careful. She's Italian. Italians don't have a history of political stability. So she needs to be careful too. It's just there's social media echo chambering going on, but when you come down to the reality, there's only one smoothly consistent player right now, and his name's Vladimir Putin, and he's not worried. And it doesn't mean that he's detached, because I listened to him in St. Petersburg, and then I got to the Donbass, and I got to he gets his calmness from the Russian people, especially the closer you get to the front line. The first, you can get in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and you'll find these little nervous Nellies running around. Oh, well, but the vast majority of people, I mean, again, the Russians are just, they don't wake up going, oh no, an oil tank blew up outside of Moscow. Some nervous Nellies do, but most of them go, oh, well, they'll take care of it. We'll get on. Oh, you're paying a little bit more for gas. Yeah, we are. It's a pain in the ass. You got to wait in line today to get gas. Yeah, but let's wait 4 days. See, that's the other thing. All these lines they keep talking about. You know how consistent, you know where the lines are today that were 4 days ago? They don't exist. Why? Because Russia has brought in fuel and brought them to the only place you have a problem is in Crimea. But even in Crimea, most of the gas stations have reopened. People just don't talk about that.
One more question, if Joe will allow it. The Rasputitsa, the wet season at the end of September. I'm just wondering if the Russians after Konstantinovka, and what do you think, Scott? Do you think they're going to do it, or do you think they'll sort of just keep chipping away, attriting?
Well, I think they're going to try. I think, I mean, but there's also no doubt that, they aren't going to sacrifice needless casualties. This concept of human wave assaults, that means you don't have any clue what's going on in the battlefield. There's no human wave assaults. The assaults are being done in groups of 3, in groups of 6, in groups of 9. It's a very tenuous assault forward with fire support, drone support. You got the enemy drones coming in. Sometimes that stalls your attack. The Ukrainian drone, the one thing the Russians says, they respect the hell out of the Ukrainian drone operators. They said they have great technology, and they do. They have great technology. It's all given to them free by the West. And they got a lot of drones, and it causes problems. There's times where the Russians are overwhelmed by drones, and then when that happens, the assault stops. You can't do an assault. Drones are picking you off, and they do suffer casualties. There's no doubt about that. But the Russians, when that happens, they don't panic. They have specialty units, Rubicon. I was supposed to get an interview. Rubicon is a specialty Russian drone unit. And I was lined up to interview them and all this stuff, but they are too sensitive right now. The Russians are like, you go talk to these guys, and you can talk to these, but this one we don't want you to touch because you'll see too much. But the Rubicon is a hit team. When Rubicon comes in, Rubicon goes in and kills every Ukrainian drone operator in its sector of operations and pushes the Ukrainian drones back. And then the Russians come in with their own drones, flooded in there, take control, and begin the advance again. It's a hard war. There's nothing easy about what's going on right now. It's very hard, very difficult, but the Russians are winning. They're prevailing. They're pushing forward. And at some point in time, as I said, the Ukrainians, they have put a lot of emphasis on drone warfare. They've flooded the area. I mean, 80,000 drone operators were trained. They're all dying right now, literally all dying. On a daily basis, they're losing 6, 12, 18 at a time, and they can't be replaced. These are skilled operators that can't be replaced. The difference between going out there and flying your standard your radio controlled drone in the early days, that's not how it works anymore. You have to have a drone operator who understands when he's being jammed, how to click over to the next frequency, how to shut down. They're playing games with this, but then you have the fiber optic drones. That's a whole different skill set. And then you have the mesh internet drones, another skill set. And you have to know when to use them and how to combine them. And this takes time, 6 months just to be able to master it. And all the 6 months operators are dying right now. The Russians are killing them, slaughtering them. And so when the Ukrainians lose the drone front, because they have the ability to put a drone wall up right now, they're losing that ability. And when they lose that ability and they lack maneuver forces to fill the gap, the Russians will surge forward. And I think what the Russians are planning on in the month of August and September is that there's going to be, and the Russians are going to be able to go in. They may not be able to take Kramatorsk or Sloviansk by rainy season, but they'll have, and then I think you're going to see also in the wintertime, there will be that the Russians are preparing unit because this winter, the Ukrainians will have no energy this winter, none. They'll have no fuel for their army. They'll have no heat for their civilian population. It's going to be a dark, black winter, but the no fuel for their army is going to be the killer because this isn't going to be a situation both armies are static. This is going to be a situation where the Ukrainians have nothing, zero. They can't resupply. The Russians will have drone dominance, and then the Russians are going to come in and they're just going to grind them on down. Though I don't know if the Russians are going to be able to take the Donbass by the end of summer. I think Putin would love it. Who wouldn't? But the Ukrainians are putting up effective resistance. They're very determined. But the Russians are better. And I think what you're going to see is the Russians are going to push to get a toehold in each one of these urban environments, then the rainy season, the Russians will be able to resupply. The Ukrainians won't. Whatever troops they have are going to be starving. They're going to be hungry. They're going to have no ammunition. And then the weather's going to get where maneuver comes in, and it's going to be over.
From the tactical to the strategic, if could have one more question. Finland and Lithuania have said that they're going to allow nuclear weapons to be deployed on their. I could make a case that that could become. I mean, it's bad enough they're trying to get Ukraine into NATO with the long border they have with Finland, and I don't know. Do you think this is real, Scott? Do you think that the Finns, who would give them these nuclear weapons? Would the U.S. or would it have to come from Britain or France? Do you have any thoughts on this? Because I think this is a really big strategic challenge for Putin.
No, it's a big problem. It's France is causing most of the problems right now. It's the French who are offering to provide nuclear-equipped Rafale fighters to operate off of Finnish air bases. But again, this becomes a self-solving problem when Macron leaves and Le Pen becomes president. Then there will be no French nuclear presence in Finland. So on Lithuania, I don't think it's American, nuclear weapons because first of all, well, because understand this, that a French Rafale with a nuclear weapon in Finland is not a NATO weapon. Because in order to be a NATO weapon, the NATO Nuclear Committee has to agree to it, and it has to be part of the NATO nuclear strategy, and Finland has to. And this creates all sorts of problems for Finland in terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and things like that. Finland has no idea what kind of headache you're creating for themselves. Russia's already told them that you're now a nuclear target. So that's a new reality that Finland has to deal with, and they don't understand that. But the thing is, the political will here, this is Emmanuel Macron literally committing suicide. The French have to understand, and the Russians have tried to make this point, that it's just one Sarmat missile, one. Not one regiment, not one division. One Sarmat missile and France disappears, together with England, and maybe parts of Germany. Just one. This isn't going to be France, Russia. One hits and all of France disappears instantaneously. There's no defending against it. And
then it doesn't matter. Then it doesn't matter if they invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty.
No, it's over at that point. But I'll tell you, Russia is confident with this, that they will destroy Europe and still exist. And then this is where Karaganov's, thinking is that, the United States won't commit this. And I agree. The United States is not encouraging nuclear weapons to Finland and all this. It's a hugely destabilizing, but I also think it's a self-cleansing problem, meaning that when Macron leaves, and he will be gone soon. Le Pen just got cleared by the French Supreme Court. She's now a presidential candidate. And I think she's the next president of France. And she will not allow French nuclear weapons on Finnish soil. She will also undo the stupid French-England nuclear pact. And so there's just things that are going to happen. Europe has been positioning itself to do things it can't do. They've been bragging that they can bench press 315 pounds. But when they pinch the breast, there's 135 pounds, and they can't even get that off. These are weaklings. Europe is a weak continent with no military capability, and even the French nuclear deterrent is a joke. Did you see the former, was it Robertson, the former British Minister of Defense, George Robinson, I think, or George Robertson or something like that? I know the Kremlin, and I know that the one thing that makes the Kremlin lose sleep at night and sit up and pay attention is the independent British nuclear deterrent. Like, really? You really think the Russians lose sleep over this? They don't. But actually, we don't need to dig too much into this because it's premature. But I had an interesting meeting with Chinese, and we're starting to have we're having a dialogue about nuclear, the nuclear proliferation and arms control in general. The Chinese have been very reticent to talk about arms control. They don't want to play the American game. But the one thing that is clear that if China is going to throw its hat into the arms control ring, it will not do it in isolation, meaning that the French and the British are going to have to be thrown in too. And I think the United States wants the Chinese involved in this discussion. So the idea that France and England are right now are out there flexing muscles they don't have, and at some point in time they're going to be called to heel like the little puppies they are, and the United States is going to work with Russia and China to eliminate the independent French and British nuclear deterrent. They can't afford them. They're very expensive. They're very destabilizing. And again, when Ukraine disappears, and it will disappear, all of this flexing and expenditure of money is going to look stupid.
Just one really, Scott, next time you're in Russia, if you get a chance to talk to somebody really high, I worry about the British all the time, the British independent nuclear thing. I mean, you might want to tell this high official what my grandfather told me. He says, Raymond, do you know? I know. You don't know. Sit you down. And I'll tell you, the sun never sets on the British Empire because the good Lord would never trust the British in the dark. So pass that along. This independent nuclear capability could be a problem if I know anything about the.
Sure, but I mean, again, it's the same thing. So they fire, and so they have to know that this is instant death for everybody in England.
Ours, but to do or die, have a stick. I was joking, of course. Joe, we have really kind of aced you out of the conversation here. You've been smiling, and I hope you don't mind us carrying on like this. I've really enjoyed it. I learned a lot.
Oh, hi. Yeah, remember me? Yes. No, I thought it was your grandmother told that story. But speaking of Britain, whereas Scott is pointing out Le Pen in France and AfD in Germany will change policy towards Russia, we have seen, first of all, Andy Burnham was going to take over from Starmer, is same policy, but more importantly, Farage, if he overcomes his scandal and Reform Party in Parliament, he's projected to be perhaps the next prime minister, believe it or not, because they've overtaken the Conservatives. And he recently changed his position. He had been critical of Western policy towards Russia, and now he's saying Russia is the biggest threat to Europe. So he sees himself being prime minister, and he thinks he has to change his position. So we may not see that same change in Britain. But Scott, I want to ask you about Poland. Some time ago in this conversation, you talked about Poland sort of getting fed up with Ukraine. There's a story that I missed that happened on June 20th, where Ukrainians returned, you talked about the Dark Eagle, where Ukraine Zelensky returned the order of the White Eagle back to Poland because the Polish criticized the Ukrainians for naming one of their divisions after the Ukrainian insurgent army, the UPA. Of course, they're responsible for killing maybe 100,000 or more Poles during the Second World War. What will happen in Ukraine if, in fact, you say Ukraine will disappear, Russia will take Odessa, go all the way maybe to the Romanian border? Will they leave a rump Ukraine where the capital being Lvov, which is really what Ukraine is, isn't it? Kiev being more a Russian city than Ukraine. But Lvov is the center of Ukrainian nationalism and ethnicity, if you could put it that way. What do the Poles do if this happens?
Well, understand the Poles can do nothing unless Russia allows it. So the Ukrainians, Zelensky at one time when he was receiving the Order of the White Eagle from the Poles, and he was considered to be a man of, they went in, they tried to set up some sort of economic union that created, sort of a free economic interplay, and the idea was to make Western Ukraine and Poland sort of, and the reason for that is that they were trying to get Polish peacekeepers to come into Western Ukraine, and and the Russians and the Belarusians put everybody on the and then there was talk about Polish soldiers. I mean, if you go talk to the Russians, they'll say that a lot of Polish speakers on the front lines, a reflection of certain realities. But what happened now? Narishkin made an interesting. I think it was last summer, or ago it was. I think it was last summer, maybe early. No, it was last summer, where Narishkin, they had a conference and they said, you know, they could conceive of Western Ukraine being um, Poles. There was, but again, that was back when Vladimir Putin's gone through certain iterations of what he would accept in finale. That statement was made, I think, in June or July of last year, before August. But in August, and I was surprised by this. This is one of the things that surprised me. And Ray, maybe I'd like to know if it surprised you. The Because at the time I said there's no way Putin would ever allow for a freezing of the front lines in Kherson and Zaporozhye. That, but apparently in Alaska, Putin did. That was the concession that he made. He said, "Give me all of the Donbass, and we will freeze the front line in Zaporozhye and Kherson, and we will allow." There's a huge concession, one that I was shocked when I heard about it. Um, and I think Narishkin's talk about Western Ukraine was at that time. Today, first of all, Putin's done. He says, and Lavrov said everything, that whatever we agreed to in Alaska is no longer in play. That's not the deal. We're now all in on not just all the territory, but we're in for the security buffer. And as I said, Sumy, Kharkov, and Odessa are now identified by Putin by name as Russian cities. Um, there's also talk now. If you go back and you take a look at the lead up to Yalta, the question of you know and Stalin always said that, or Stalin I think said, well, we agree with Lord Curzon where the border should be. Fundamentally, give away Western Ukraine. I think the Russians are in the mood to eradicate Banderist ideology. I think the notion of leaving a rump state where the hateful ideology of Bandera can continue to reside is no longer a politically viable thing. Now that doesn't mean it can't change back, but in talking to Russians, including a former FSB colonel who defected in 2014, stayed in active service with the a Russian FSB, a Russian SBU colonel, I'm sorry, who's now in Russia, and talking to other people. Uh, when Vladimir Putin committed to denazification, I think that it's now widely recognized that means there will be zero Banderas left in Ukraine. Um,
Mm.
and for people to understand and say, well, how could you understand the Russians did this once before? I mean, in 1954, 1955, they killed all of the Banderas or arrested all of the Banderas or drove them all out. There were zero Banderas left in Ukraine. They were all either in the Gulag in Canada. And then Khrushchev, in his immense wisdom in 1956, declared all the Banderas in the Gulag to be political prisoners, and he released them and allowed them back into Ukraine. And the CIA spent the next 40 years paying them and working with the Banderas diaspora to reinstate in an underground fashion this sickness of Banderism. And we see that manifested today with Zelensky's stupidity of reburying Andrei Melnik and renaming Ukrainian military units after him. The Russians, and again, you have to understand this. This is why I wish there was a way to get more people to go to Russia, because
Mm.
there is no Banderas. Ksenia Sobchak tried to defend. Oh, no, Banderas. Everybody use that term. What are you talking about, Ksenia? They're real. They're real. They exist. You know, But of course, she's the one who went to Ukraine shortly after the SMO, and I think stood side by side with Azov and shouted "Slava Ukraina," and then later I did said, "I don't understand what I did." Well, you know what you did, Ksenia. You sided with the Banderists, and Russia hates you for this. There is no tolerance. It's blamed for, and so it won't be allowed to exist. And therefore, I don't see an environment where Western Ukraine gets carved out. For once, I thought that was an attractive idea. Give it to the Poles. But the Poles, if this happens, the Poles have shown a tolerance for keeping this cancer, because this cancer is bad for them. And so I don't think the Russians are going to risk that. I think that the solution that's going to happen is that Western Ukraine will remain, and every Banderist that resides in there will die. And that's where Russia is right now. Understand there's zero forgiveness in Russia anymore. The concept of Ukrainians are my brother, that it does that only exists in the mind of elites. There's nobody in Russia today who says I'm sort of Phillies. No. And if you're a Banderist, you're going to die. It's 100%. And great, you talked about. You know what I'm talking about. They're taking names, and those names are dead men walking.
I do, and this is a list more operative, I hope, than the list that you and I are on with respect to the. Okay, but look, I think this is a really important problem. People say, this conflict is not going to settlement. Now it's going to be one. Well, that's easy to say. Putin and his associates are looking at this and, okay, so we go all up. Maybe we even take Kiev in as peaceful a way as we can. What then? So, the implication of this for me is that the only way they can get some reasonable people in Europe is to keep the United States in the Europeans. So look, we have to get to some sort of negotiated settlement now, since the Russians have won in the east, and the Poles, of course, present well, it was only 120,000, right? 120 or 100,000 at Volnia, and they're I think today was a celebration when that happened. It's a big deal in Poland, so they hate so. The twin aim of the special military operation, as we all recall, was demilitarization, maybe, and that's going to be a really tough job. But when there's no more military, where are the Nazis going to go? I think they're going to go to Lvov, okay? And then the Russians will be faced with a need to make the buffer, whatever. So it's a thorny problem. So all I'm saying here is that's in the future. It's not enough to say the war will be won on the battlefield, because the Russians don't look at this way. They don't want it to happen again. It's going to happen again if they don't fix this Western Ukraine, that there's no Banderas in there, and maybe the Poles will help them with that. But that's for the long future, and that's what the Russians mean when they talk about a new architecture, which they broached to us officially back in December of 2021. And of course, as Jens Stoltenberg said, the Russians, they said, if you keep trying to get Ukraine, and so invaded Ukraine. Now, he wanted to stop expansion of NATO. Finland, by that time, 500,000 young Ukrainians were killed on the battlefield. My God, what kind of leadership do you have like that? So he admits it was all about NATO. Now, all this stuff, when it ends up, what's left of NATO, if the U.S. is still involved in Europe in some way, and no doubt it will be, then Putin, I think, is still holding out the hope, despite Lavrov and the others, that if he cajoles, or if he kind of flatters Trump enough and tells him what a great wife he has, and how the Fourth of July celebrations, as Putin told Trump, according to Ushakov, he said, "Oh, the Fourth of July celebration, and his wife is still working on." So they're going to keep massaging him in the hopes that they don't have to deal solely with the Europeans after the war on the battlefield is won. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I may be wrong, but that's my hunch.
Let me just throw something out there that when I was in Donetsk, I got to go visit a unit called the M. Kirvonos unit. It's bigger than a battalion, let's call it that. Maybe a brigade-sized unit. Now, these are all former Ukrainian armed. Some are prisoners of war, some are defectors who came over. They've gone through an extensive screening, verified as being legitimate. They don't fight. They are a Ukrainian army, and they fight. And these guys, they go to the part of the front where Azov is. They
Up in
go
the north?
wherever they are. They go up
Okay.
north. They're in the because there's several of these units, but they seek out the nationalists. They suffer casualties as well. But the point is, um, my book Highway to Hell was published in Russian language, so I took advantage of a couple of yeah, Ray. Thank you, Ray, for what I can.
Don't get any money for this.
Highway to Hell, but it was
It's my
published in Russian.
copy.
I did a. I'll get you a copy. I'm sorry, Joe.
All
I've been
right.
I've been traveling a lot lately, but you know, but I got convinced. I did one in Donetsk, in the city of Donetsk, and there were some soldiers there, and yeah,
Hmm.
I they were listening. They asked some questions and all that, and then I saw them the next day when I went to the Kironis unit to their training grounds. One of them, there was just he just had a scowl on his face. He listened to things. Everybody else asked questions. He just scowled. When I tried to talk to him, he just scowled. I mean, I thought, this guy wants to kill me. He's a scowler. Um, then I went to the unit and he continued to scowl. But after what, he was a drone operator. And after a while, I think I won him over because I actually, I'm a former military guy. We sat down, we told lies, and I won him over. And in the end, he took the patch off his shoulder and gave me his patch, and he actually smiled on his face a little bit. But I asked somebody later, I said, what's his story? And why is everybody? Um, he said he's 22 years old. He's been in the unit for 2 years. He's been wounded 13 times. He's a frontline drone operator. He goes where the fighting is, and he's been blown up 13 times, and 13 times he's come back. The kid's ruined for life. He's just a psychological wasteland. I mean, that's just the. But he's from Lvov, and
No.
it isn't going to be Russia occupying Western Ukraine. This battalion. It's going to be other Ukrainian. The Russians are building a Ukrainian army of occupation right
Hmm.
now. When this war ends, they will demilitarize, and then they will move in this Ukrainian military that is solely focused on eradicating Banderists. That's all they live to do. This kid, 22 years old, all he wants to do is kill Banderists. That's all he lives for right now. Now he's going to be ruined for life. I'm not pretending. And I talked to commanders about this. They said this is a problem, especially with drone warfare. The whole psychological concept of drone warfare. It's like snipers. Snipers get to look at their target up close through the lens and then watch their head turn to peak miss. Well, drone operators hunt their targets down and then see their terrified faces the last thing before the drone flies in. And you can only do this a few times before you become immune. And how do you psychologically deal with it? You dehumanize people and you view this as a computer game and all this. And the best drone operators have just become so desensitized to death because they're just killing. I mean, literally, they're just killing 15, 20 people a day. Boom, 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 boom. And it's a problem. It's a long-term problem. And I talked to the Russians, how are you going to deal with this? I said, well, we got to find a way to use their skills. What we really have to be careful of is when the war ends, they're going to become adrenaline junkies and go off and take their skill set, where somebody needs it, highest bidder. But then we get back to this. The Russians are building a Ukrainian army of occupation that will occupy Ukraine and kill Banderists. I just want people to understand this. This isn't rhetoric. The Banderists are so hated, utterly hated, despised, not just by the Russians, but by many Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians are coming over. And when you have demilitarization, there's going to be a significant part of the Ukrainian army and they're going to go in terrorists. This isn't going to be about Russian soldiers kicking down doors in Lvov. This is going to be about Ukrainians hunting these dogs down and butchering them in the street. So if you're listening to me and you're a Banderist, leave. Go run away to Europe. Go to the United States where they'll take you in Ellenville and they'll put you up and you can train the next generation of Ukrainian American children about the glories of Stepan Bandera, as long as the United States taxpayer allows this to happen. You can go to Australia, you can go to England, but if you stay in Western Ukraine, you're going to die. You're going to be hunted down like the dogs you are. And I met the soldiers that are going to do it, and they hate you. Fact is, they're out there hunting you down right now, and you know it because they're killing you as I speak. These are dedicated Ukrainian patriots and their numbers are growing and growing and growing as Ukrainians come over, and the Russians have a system to vet them, a very effective system of vetting them. And there's been zero problems. They've had no problems with somebody coming in and being working for the other side. They find them, and I don't need to tell you what happens to somebody who tries to infiltrate this unit. They don't live long. So this is the reality. This is a different 2 years ago. When I visited the special military operation in January of 2024, the war that I experienced is a completely different war. It's on so many different levels. First of all, the level of hatred for Ukrainian nationalists is off the scale, off the scale. And the level of hatred for Ukrainian drone operators is off the scale too. If you're a Ukrainian drone operator, well, you're probably going to die soon anyways because Rubicon's got your number. But don't surrender. It won't end up well for you because you hunt down civilians. You hunt down civilians. You murder civilians. That's what you do, and the Russians know it, and they know who you are. They know who you are. The operators who fired the drones at Starobelsk, they got your names, guys. They know who you are, and you're going to die. This is the way it is. They're taking names. There will be justice, and it's going to be harsh justice. This is going to end badly for all the Ukrainian nationalists and all the Ukrainian drone operators. Just ask, what is it? I'm going to butcher his name. Bandera's little lieutenant, Shushkevich or whatever. He ended up getting his brains blown out in a shootout in 1954. That's the fate of every single Banderist. You think you're going to hide, you think you're going to do guerrilla warfare. It's over. They've got your names. They're hunting you down as we speak. And you know this because the guy that you talked to last night's dead. The drone operator you supplied the drone to is dead. The Russians are killing the Ukrainians in numbers that the West refuses to acknowledge. And that's just the reality of the battlefield. This is why you don't see any panic in Vladimir Putin's face. He's not going to tell you that the war isn't hard. I saw too many frontline soldiers said this is a very hard war. It's the hardest. This phase of the war right now is the hardest phase that's existed since Bakhmut. Bakhmut was a different thing, bloody, horrible. But this drone warfare, I'm doing a documentary film called The Gray Zone, and it's going to talk about this. This is a different kind of warfare. The West has no clue. This is another reason why I'm like, what is the West going to do? You're going to put a 5,000 brigade and you're going to die. All of you are going to die before you even get to. The gray zone is 60 kilometers long. Before you can even close with the Russians to begin bringing your direct fire weapons to bear, you're going to go through 55 kilometers of death zone. You're not going to make it to the front line. You're all going to die because you don't.
Ray, just a moment, Ray. I just wanted to point out that there are no Nazis in Ukraine. The New York Times says so, NewsGuard says so, and it astonishes me that they named a unit after the Ukrainian insurgent army, or that they reburied Melnik. I mean, right in the face of the propaganda of the West that there are no Nazis. The Ukrainians are doing these. Zelensky's doing this himself. Yes, Ray.
Well, the people that Scott's just been talking about are probably lining up to get tickets to Argentina even as we speak. Let me just raise a thing in this last few minutes. The West is saying that Russia's lost, the Ukraine and the Europeans are winning. I'm really confused. I'm really worried about what happens when all of a sudden it dawns on most of the West that this was not true. And how is the West, how are Western leaders going to justify the reality? Was this some kind of trick? What are they for? They must know we're winning. So can you explain doing this? I mean, it's counterintuitive. I don't have any answer to it, but I do worry about how the Russians look at this. So that was the last thought I had, for what it's worth.
Well, no, but it's a fair point. And again, this is the fascinating thing about this topic. Does the West really believe that Putin is on the verge of collapse? I mean, Gilbert Doctorow certainly believes it. He spouts his bullshit. I'm just here to tell you right now, everything Gilbert said is factually wrong. None of it's real. None of it's real. None of it's real. He can
Well,
pick up a phone and call his little.
I have to disagree with that. I think that's hyperbole. I think he's a pretty good observer of what the Russians say publicly. I read him carefully. I don't often agree with his latest lines, but not everything he says is false.
Everything he says is false, Ray. Everything. Nothing he says about the state of Putin's government is factually correct. Okay. Any implication that Putin's at risk this September, which is the cornerstone of Gilbert Doctorow's concept right now, that if Putin isn't careful, United Russia will get swept in September. Do you understand how stupid this is? This means this man has no grasp of reality at all about the Russian domestic political dynamic. Vladimir Putin is going to sweep in September because Russia is rallying around him like the Iranians rallied around the supreme leader. And if Gilbert Doctorow can't see that, then he's blind.
I've had discussions with him about this via email, and I'm not so sure, Scott. There's a lot of stuff going on in public in Russia now, and so you may be right, but I think we have big. I've asked Dr. Rao, how do you see the situation before the elections and after the likely results? We've had some really kind of instructive conversations, me and him. So I'm open to all these things, but I don't think that it's a. And when the head of RT says, "Yeah, we should have done this vчера, yesterday," there is this sentiment. So let's allow 100 flowers to bloom.
I'm just telling you, Ray, I just came back from Russia.
Right.
Nothing Gilbert Doctorow says is reflective in the reality of Russia. I want to know his sources. Okay, I'll give you my frickin' sources. I'll tell you who I spoke to. I'll tell you who I met with. I want to know Gilbert Doctorow's sources. And I also want to know about what the fuck he does in Brussels. Who pays him? Okay, I want to know why this MI6 operative is allowed to do whatever the hell he does. All right.
Okay. Well, that's. I mean, Joe, you have to get him on here with.
I definitely have to get him on to respond to that and to debate you, Scott, if he's willing to do it. I definitely need him to respond because we're giving you a platform to say this about him. What I know about Gilbert is, well, a few things, but one is that he's attuned to the media there. He watches the TV shows and he translates the stuff. That's what he used to do for Bob Perry and Consortium News. He was writing stuff like that. But anyway, I want to move on to Iran. If I'd want to ask you, Scott, what was the name of this unit you said that's dedicated to fighting the Banderas? Is there a name?
It's not a nickname. The name is the M. Bonus Battalion.
MK, like MK Ultra?
No, not MK. That's our business there, Joe.
This is the patch of their drone unit.
Oh, I see. Wow. Oh,
Are they the baddies or are we the baddies?
yeah.
I wouldn't want to go up against them on the field of battle if I were Azov.
Yeah, fascinating. I had no idea. That's really news that you broke for me anyway about this unit, and it's fascinating. So I wanted to quickly talk a little bit about Iran. Please, Scott, we'll go with you first. Can you explain what is your understanding of what is happening right now in this ridiculous, continuously turning events where there's threats from Trump, then there's negotiations, and there's exchange of fire, then it's back to, I mean, it's getting a bit absurd. How do you see what's happening right now?
Hybrid diplomacy.
Uh-huh.
This was the MOU was never an MOU,
Right.
and the Iranians never viewed it as such. The Iranians basically said, "We know the United States is going to violate this." The United States never was in compliance with the MOU ever. Understand? I forget what article it was, but you're not allowed to threaten the use of force. Day one, Donald Trump, we're going to blow you into hell if you don't do what we want you to do. The MOU was always fatally flawed. 60 days of, we're all going to agree to a ceasefire, but in 60 days, the Iranians have to basically concede everything that we couldn't get up front. The Ukrainians were never going to concede on any of these issues, zero. And not the Ukrainians, the Iranians. And they knew this. The Iranians knew this. But the Iranians went along with this. Why? So they could sell 60 million barrels of oil. And they did. And they got it to market and they made money. And the United States did this as well, kept it going, even though we had no intention. Remember J.D. Vance? The MOU, nah, we're just buying time to get some oil in the, you know, recharge our tanks, and then we're going to do it. Yeah. So it was always a lie. And this is the permanent state that we're in right now. Neither side is going to fully commit to war. The United States and because if the Iranians actually did what they promised to do, they'd be blowing the crap out of everybody right now. One violation, we're coming in hard. But instead, they do this tit for tat, and then they both stop. Some ships go through, some oil gets sold, and then they do the thing. Now, this is the permanent state right now. Until one side, and the United States has got nothing. What do we have? What do we have? We don't have the ability to launch another 39-day war against Iran. We don't have the ammunition at all. The Iranians, on the other hand, can not only fire missiles, but they can shut down both the Strait of Hormuz. Just shut down tonight. It's gone. You do know that, right? The Oman, the little secret corridor the United States tried to cut, it doesn't work anymore. It's been mined. Nothing's going through there. So if you want to go through the Strait of Hormuz, you have to go through the Iranians and pay the Iranian price, and they'll let you go through if the United States doesn't sink you in the meantime. So what is the United States going to do? Put up another naval blockade? When they do that, the Bab el-Mandeb could be shut down. Then Saudi Arabia is going to be screaming bloody murder because they have no oil going to market. And that means nobody has oil going to market. And then the global economy is going to do what it was headed to, and Trump's going to have to yield again. And this is the cycle we're going to see. And both sides are going to play it. Iran's going to play it until which time they can solidify their diplomatic and economic base of support in the East. They're making that strategic pivot to the East. And once they can get that solidified, then the United States becomes irrelevant. And at some point in time, the Gulf Arab states are going to tell the United States, we can't sustain this model anymore. It's an unsustainable model. When Kuwait runs out of money, when Bahrain runs out of money, when Saudi Arabia runs out of money, and they'll run out of money because they can't sell oil. Right now, they have a temporary reprieve, hybrid diplomacy, fake diplomacy, taking advantage of a moment. But it's unsustainable over time. And I do believe at some point in time, the Iranians are going to shut both the Strait and shut Bab el-Mandeb, and the United States will be modifying its stance. But the Iranians are never going to give Trump what he wants on nuclear. Never. Never going to give him what he wants on nuclear, which is total abdication, surrender. And Trump is unable to accept anything less than that. So that issue alone is going, unless they can find a way to punt that issue down the road, which might be the solution. Just stop talking about it. Say it's an indefinite problem. That could be a solution. Strait of Hormuz, Trump is going to have to accept the fact that Iran is in control. Iran will not yield on this issue. And then we're about to see the Bab el-Mandeb become a factor. The Houthi are fed up with the Saudis. Fed up with the Saudis. The Saudis tried to shoot down an airplane that was bringing in there was landing, and there was going to take a delegation to the funeral of Ali Khamenei, and the Houthi said, if you do this, Saudi Arabia is going to come under risk, and so now the Saudis have activated their Yemen government allies, and there's a war going on. The Houthi may just get fed up and say we're shutting down the Bab el-Mandeb because that's their strategic card too. And there's nothing the United States can do about that. People need to understand we have zero military capacity of any meaningful. Okay. We can send ATACMS, we can send HIMARS, we can blow up a couple things. This is not war-winning stuff that we're doing. It's not. We did this for 39 days.
It's no way to run an empire, is it? Without bombs, without the weapon, without the munitions. This idle threat.
Picky.
Ray, before I ask you to give me your take on this insanity, I'm calling it this war in a loop, this Fruit Loops, really. We've got this headline here on Haaretz, which says, Trump says U.S. military all of Iran should have tried to assassinate him. And that follows the Iran Supreme Leader Khamenei says revenge must certainly take place for slain father. What's being set up here?
Well, I think maybe the Israelis are telling Trump that he's going to be assassinated by the Iranians. Can you imagine? Is Trump still so gullible that he believed the Israelis this time? Well, maybe. He says, I'm the list, just that I'm on a knock list. Come on, I'm number one. I mean, this is what these people are dealing with. Now, let me just say in a more serious vein, I think Scott said, let me just add some at the edges, like Israel, like you just said. Um, this is the Trump needs that damn strait open. That strait is Iran's nuclear weapon, and as Scott already pointed out, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait nuclear weapon, and Maersk freighters and oilers are coming down through the Suez Canal as we speak, and they're going to try to get el-Mandeb. We'll have to see how that works out because that's going to happen in the next 2 days, I think. Now, I think, like Scott, they'll probably close that thing down. The Houthis will. With now, the he can't get it open with what he's got in the area now. He's not got enough weaponry to do more against Iran that he's already done. He's got the 82nd, and he's got what, a bunch of Marines on, I think, 2 troop landing ships. Is he going to be tempted to put them on Iranian soil? If he does, he's crazy. I ever thought he was. What is the military going to tell him? Are they going to tell him, oh, yeah, we'll give it a try? I don't think so. So what Trump has to do is what he did a couple of weeks ago. Cave in, agree to this 14, 15 points or whatever it is, as long as he could get the strait open. Now, the Iranians have all been browbeaten, and they have Russia and China. Actually, China's becoming more vocal about all this in the last couple of days. They have them in their bullpen, so to speak. So what's going to happen is that Trump's going to have to, and the first one, of course, was 2 sentences, the clause, and it's hard for us to understand, but it has to do with Lebanon. And the underpinning is that the Iranians, for some reason, care about the people in Lebanon who are being occupied and submitted to all the indignities that other occupants of Israeli occupied territory are. So, unless Trump can lean on the Israelis, Netanyahu, well, I don't know what he's going to do. So there are lots of loose ends here, but the prevailing reality is Trump has to get that thing open, and that otherwise you have a deep depression, not just in something less. The no ammo is the big thing, and my big worry, as I just noted down here, is nukes. Now, if Israel, if it also attacks Iran, in Lebanon, and Iran's going to retaliate against Israel to the point where they will face an existential threat. Now, I don't want that to happen because my view of Netanyahu and his cohort is that these people are capable of genocide, forced starvation, weapons. I think the chances are greater than even that they would continue, they would choose that option and pull this and give in. That's what gives me pause. I hope there are some sensible statesmen, maybe in Pakistan and Qatar and other places like that, where that can be prevented. But that'd be the worst case. And as I see things evolving, it'll take a miracle, as they said in The Princess Bride. It'll take a miracle to prevent this from getting really out of hand.
Well, unlike in Ukraine war, as Scott pointed out, if there are new leaders in France and in Germany and whatnot, policy will change. That probably is not going to happen with Iran, no matter who is the new prime minister in Israel and who might become the new president of the United States. There doesn't seem to be any difference in terms of bipartisan views of the Iran situation. And that's very dangerous. I think